Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on making sense of techno-economic and life cycle assessments for CO2 utilization, a guide on how to commission, understand, and derive decisions from TEA and LCA. My name is Volker Sick. I'm the director of the Global CO2 Initiative at the University of Michigan, and it is my pleasure to host this webinar together with our collaborators at RWTH Aachen, TU Berlin, the University of Sheffield, and the Institute of Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam. This work that we're discussing today was also co-funded by EIT Climate Kick. We're excited to bring this webinar to you with our co-hosts at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, the National Energy Technology Laboratory, Carbon 180, and I would like to acknowledge the support of KPMG. Before I hand over to Dr. Stephen McCord from the University of Sheffield to give you a brief overview of the underlying guidelines that we have published on techno-economic assessment and life cycle assessment for CO2 utilization. And then to Dr. Lorenzo Cremonese from IASS to give you an overview of the discussion that we would like to have with you on the Making Sense document. We will lead this discussion with the Q&A tool of the Zoom webinar. And you can ask questions. You can vote these questions up and down. We will get to answer the questions in order of the number of votes or order of received, whatever takes priority. Please note that we have received a lot of requests for recording the presentations, so we are doing this. We will not share the discussion, so we can strictly follow Chatham House rules. And as such, we hope for your candid feedback, input, and response to what we have in store for you. With that, it is my pleasure to hand over to Dr. Stephen McCord.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Volker, for the introduction. Let's hope that this remote access holds up. There we go. Okay, yes, I'm going to provide a very quick, brief introduction to our project. That would be the Techno-Economic Assessment and Life Cycle Assessment Guidelines for CO2 Utilization. I'm Stephen McCord, and I'm speaking on behalf of the rest of our team. Let's start with a very quick overview of the prior guideline project. So this is something that we spoke about in Ann Arbor last year, where we had a specific set of goals, which we ultimately feel that we met, and we produced a set of guidelines around LCA and TEA for CCU. So we had the goal of defining a common assessment language to push R&D and investment commercialization of CCU. We wanted to enhance transparency and comparability. So we see a lot of what we refer to as apples to oranges comparisons, where things may look somewhat similar but aren't exactly great for comparing. And we'd like to create a space where people can reliably compare, or at least understand what the limitations of these comparisons are. We wanted to align guidance on LCA and TEA. So this was easy for LCA. Our guidance is derived from the ISO standard. And then we thought this would be an excellent basis to develop guidance for TEA too. And throughout all of this, we think that community engagement is very important to ensure that this becomes an accepted standard, and that this actually follows best practices that everyone's following. So that's pretty much where we started at. The main sponsors of the prior project were GCI, the Global CO2 Initiative, and EIT Climate Kick. We are happy to be working with them again on consistent. And I'd just like to mention once again our project partners, and how the sort of work splits up. So we have TU Berlin, who are resident experts on TEA, all things TEA, and Aachen for LCA, and then ourselves in Sheffield and our friends in Potsdam work across both and for the lead of the other two institutions. So as we mentioned, we felt the project was successful, and we're happy to be back for a 3-year project now titled Consistent. So here's a brief picture of our team, from the last meeting we had in Brussels, back when we were still allowed to see people and not have to sit inside our little homes all day. But yeah, more seriously, we should talk about the aims of the actual project. So I have sort of paraphrased them here to make them nice and brief. So we want to continue the successful rollout and implementation of the guidelines, and we'd really like further feedback to ensure that the guidelines remain community-led. You're going to see a lot of this from us throughout our meetings today and tomorrow, where we really want your input, because we can't develop this in a silo. We'd really like to continue working with you guys. We want to expand the range of guidance that we offered from the first project. So our plan to do this is by releasing an updated version of the original guidelines that came from the prior project, which we've dubbed version 1.1. So this is taking on board more comments that we've been given back over the last year and a half. This will ultimately lead to the delivery of a version 2 of the document at the end of the whole project, so after 3 years. And this will cover new elements that we haven't covered yet so far. So integration of LCA and TEA, and then how to handle studies for low TRL. As we're here to discuss today, we would like to provide additional support for those wishing to make use of the results of the study. So not just practitioners themselves, but anybody else that would like to commission a study or use a study. And just by providing a little bit of extra guidance to introduce these concepts to other people and to show how they can be used to help you in your decision-making process. And then alongside this, we want to expand our practical guidance by producing more of the works examples we produced in the prior project. So in the last project, these focused primarily on full studies, and now we've started to develop smaller studies that sort of go into a bit more detail around specific elements of different studies, which they'll be released shortly. And yes, finally, we want to continue to improve harmonization between guidance efforts. So we know that we aren't the only people developing guidance like this, and we'd like to ensure that our work, or that we can continue to work with other people in this. Okay, so speaking of other initiatives, as we said, we want to look onside other groups. So we have spoken to the NATL, to NREL, a group in Europe called LCA4CCU, who are developing their own guidelines, and then the Joint Research Commission of the European Commission. And our aim really is to help deliver a consistent and harmonized message, but with different aims. So what do we mean by this? So one of the outputs of the meeting last year in Ann Arbor was a paper, and in this paper we included this diagram. And this diagram sort of adds a little bit of contextual information on how we see things fit together. So we see the general ISO, which is all-encompassing and very broad, but is probably a little bit too wide, specifically for helping decisions around CCU. We see our guidance sort of narrows this down by closing off some of those methodologies and suggesting best practices. And then beyond that, in an even more specialized way, we see the guidance by people like NETL, where they close down even more things to fit their own specific funding schemes and things like this. And we see a similar thing for RED 2 from the JRC. So we feel that there's a space for everyone, and we feel that we have identified our aim as a more universal, generic guidance that can sort of back up what everybody else sees. And then to take a couple of quotes from the prior mentioned paper, we feel that we're in a good place in terms of where we're going, and that we have at least a consistent message and a good idea with alignment with respect to the parties mentioned above. But if you guys are developing your own or looking to implement the use of guidance, please reach out. We'd love to speak to you more about this. So in terms of what we are looking to produce, or what we have produced over the course of the prior project and this project now, previously we released 3 worked examples in the guidelines as part of the last project. Now that we're at the end of year 1 of the consistent project, people can look forward to seeing guidelines version 1.1, as I mentioned before, additional worked examples, and the Making Sense report that Lorenzo is going to talk about in a short while. Things to look out for in the future from the project would be version 2 of the guidelines, further worked examples, and in terms of what you'd like to see in these worked examples, we are very open to suggestion. So if you have something that you feel we've not covered yet, or feel that there's something that should be covered in detail, please reach out and we will do our best to sort of incorporate this. And then ultimately a version 2 of the Making Sense report. So a longer version of this relatively abridged one that we have now, that we'd like your feedback on. And as mentioned before, we want to continue having events and we want to continue this sort of consultation process with you guys, as we feel that it's very important this remains community-led and that people feel that they have a stake in this. So just a quick overview of the first year of our project. As you can see, there are quite a few events we've highlighted where we have interacted with other initiatives. What we'd really like to see for year 2 is even more interaction. So once again, we are happy for suggestions on how to do this. Obviously, this current situation with the coronavirus has shifted us all to online working. Maybe this is a chance to explore this further and to further develop this and really increase this, or use this potential to develop this chance to consult and work together. And finally, one of the things that we do have ongoing is a feedback on the guidelines. So on the existing 1.0 version of the guidelines, we have a simple questionnaire for people that have used the guidelines or so this covers if you've already used the guidelines or what you'd like to see in version 1.1 and version 2. So we are always looking for more feedback. So if you have 5 or 10 minutes or whatever to quickly go over these guidelines, to provide a bit of feedback, that would be really nice. But yeah, that's all I really have to say. So I'm going to hand you over to Lorenzo, who will talk about the Making Sense report. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Volker, for your introductions. And thank you to all the participants of this webinar for taking part to the launch event of our latest output of the Consistent project. Today, I will introduce you to the report titled Making Sense of Techno-Economic Assessment and Lifecycle Assessment Studies for CO2 Utilization, authored by me and my colleagues at the ISS, Barbara Olfe-Kreutlein and Till Strunger, but also with very substantial contribution for all the members of the Consistent team. I hope that most of you had already a chance to download the document and look through it. And I guess that some of you can have already some questions and that I hope to be able to answer during my presentation. And if not, at the end of this webinar during the Q&A session. We will also welcome your comments afterwards, maybe more major comments about the structure and about the content that you can send us via email, and that we might consider implementing the very last version of this document. Volker, I think, right. Volker, I think you have to handle the control to me because I can't right now. Okay, so before starting, I would like to spend a couple of words about the ISS role in the Consistent group, but also the CO2 Utilization Strategies and Society group at the ISS. The ISS team that is engaged with the Consistent project is part of the CO2 utilization strategies and society group that is involved in several projects on CO2 utilization in Germany, but also worldwide. This ISS group is responsible for three major tasks in the Consistent project. First one is to ensure that an effective knowledge transfer and feedback process with decision makers from the policies, but also from the corporate fields are ensured. This is to be sure that our work is always aligned with what these actors need and what these actors require. As a second task we have is the organization of most of our outreach events, like workshops and similar. And the third one deals with the alignment of our work with international initiative on TA and LCA for CCU. I would like to mention among these the LCA for CCU project that just terminated, the work of the Joint Research Center in Europe, and moving to North America, the National Energy Technology Laboratory and the National Renewable Energy Laboratories. So in these slides, I report a brief overview of the presentation of today. The first point is why the Making Sense report. So why we decided to publish this report, how it relates with the consistent goals, how it complements the TA and the LCA guidelines that Stephen just presented to us, and so in other words, which needs he wants to fulfill. Then we will move to the language and the elements and the structure of this document. So to give an overview on which tools we use to make sure that this document is effective for its goals. Then I will move to a presentation of the two major components of this document that are part A, that is more discursive and in the form of text part of the document with figures and tables, and then a better overview on the insights of part B. Part B represents more an operational tool that indicates the step the decision makers have to follow to accomplish the goals. The final part, we will move to a Q&A sessions where we'll be able to share with us your major concerns, questions, or every kind of comments you might have about the report. I would also like to mention that most of the inputs for this report come from the feedbacks and the discussions we had in two major events organized by the GCI last year in Arbo in April, and also the workshop in Brussels organized by Consistent in October 2019. So why the Making Sense report? Which problem and barriers it wants to address? As you know, GCI already published a TA and LCA guidelines that provide a very useful tool for practitioners. Despite its importance, we are aware that this tool might have some issues when people that don't have the right technical background or experience try to use it. So they are highly complex for somebody that doesn't come from a very technical field. On the other side, as already Stephen mentioned, there are several initiatives worldwide trying to describe different some approaches on how to conduct these assessments on CCU technologies. And they are, as we know, they are not perfectly aligned as we would wish. So these two issues create some, let's say, barriers or impediments to achieve what we really need urgently to fight against the climate change happening today and to stay below the 2 degrees Celsius as prescribed by the IPCC. On the other side, if we don't transfer the right information and precise information coming from science, we might have the problems that the two important sectors we are referring to, that are the corporate sector, so the industry, at the same time the policy sphere, will not act in the same direction and will receive the information from science maybe too late or not in a very accurate manner. And we really have to avoid this and try to provide these fields with the best information produced by science. So in order to overcome or address the pitfalls I just mentioned, we thought of producing a document that first of all describes the power, but also the limitations of technical, economic, and life cycle assessments. So what are they used for, and how can they help for decision processes? So as the second goal, it wants to support and extend also the applicability of the Global CO2 Initiative guidelines we saw before by decision makers. So to facilitate the application of notions of reporting these guidelines to a broader audience. So we take the perspective in this document of the decision maker, that sometimes in the document you will find as named as commissioner, because in case a new study has to be commissioned, then the decision maker is named as commissioner in the text. And we have to see this document as a complementary report to the guidelines. So since because of this document is tailored to decision maker or commissioner, so we try to reduce complexity of these technical tools and focus on key aspects that are particular interest or relevant for the decision makers. That's why we provide a document that helps to gain sufficient understanding of the basic notions while still being concise, short, but clear, and try to reduce complexity. I also want to mention here the limitations of this report. So first of all, it's not a comprehensive concerning how to integrate TA and LCA for CCU. As Stephen already mentioned, this is an important goal of the consistent project that will be accomplished in the future versions of the guidelines. Also, this report does not provide CCU policy analysis on how to implement CCU in policy frameworks or which technology should be preferred to another. And also it's important to mention that a more comprehensive version of this report I'm presenting here today will be published in the very final guideline version of the consistent project in early 2022. So this report addresses two major goals, or if you will, two major tasks the decision makers might be seeking. The first one is supporting and planning TA and LCA studies by the commissioner. This is reflect the case where a new TA on the LCA study has to be performed, so has to be commissioned by the decision maker. And we want to emphasize here how important it is to frame the study correctly. We therefore provide the reader with some key concepts or steps that compose an LCA and the TA study. And they need to be defined and investigated in order to obtain the answer that the post research question has. The second one is the second task that we want to cover with this report is providing a guidance on how to evaluate existing TA on LCA studies. The second goal is important for decision makers to guarantee that they correctly understand what the results of the already existing studies indicate for a given product or service. For example, what the research question is of these existing studies, the applicability of these studies, of the results of these studies, like for example, the underlying scenarios, their limitations, like that can be assessed by uncertainty and sensitivity analysis and so on. Understanding these aspects is not immediate. We know from existing literature that some misunderstanding can occur here, and that this can be especially difficult for actors that are not from the technical field to spot these inconsistencies or encounter some misunderstanding. I give you here an example of classification of carbon emissions in CCU. So as many of you probably know, CCU technology can be classified as carbon neutral, as carbon reducing technologies, or even like carbon negative technologies. It is very important to understand to which of this group the technology you are evaluating belongs, especially if we are looking at existing studies. It's very important to understand which category it belongs and how this categorization has been performed. That is why in this report, we try to focus on aspects like this one to allow and to enable not practitioners to understand these technical issues and understand how this categorization has been performed by the existing studies. So let's move to the next slide, the structure. So to best address these two main tasks I just introduced now to you, we organize the Making Sense reports in two major parts. Each of these two parts are complementary to each other and answer specific needs that I already mentioned before. So first of all, part A introduced the reader to the LCA and TA tools for CCU. And here we present all the technical concept, the theory behind TA and LCA, specifically applied to CCU. So the technical terms, what they mean, and all the important elements that characterize these tools. We also provide in this part some direct references to the guidelines in case the reader wants to go more into the details of the concept explained. So on what we focus in this part A. In part A, we focus on the definition of the research question and goal. So how to deal with this step of these studies that has to be undertaken while performing these studies. We focus also significantly on the scope definition that we believe is an essential part of these studies. Then we move to the understanding of the results, the interpretation of the results, so using uncertainty, but also sensitivity analysis. And then we dedicate some sections about reporting, how reporting should be performed and what should not be overlooked while reporting the results of a TNLCA study. We also, already in part A, we describe the collaboration between the practitioners and the decision maker or the commissioner. This is important because, as I said before, we take the perspective of the decision maker while framing this document. That is why we refer to their role and their contribution at different stage of performing these studies during the text. Moving to the next slide. So to ease understanding of this part A, we complemented this explanation of the text with different tools that help the reader to better understand and to reduce complexity of these technical concepts. So first of all, as you can see in this screenshot of a page of the report, we used regularly throughout the text these speech bubbles that refer and are based on the methanol worked example that also Stephen already introduced to you before, published by the GCI that you can download from the GCI website. So there are several examples that are based on these methanol examples that go through the text and actually they extend and they give a tangible example of the technical concept explained. We also have figures, and specifically in this one, we help the reader understanding the importance of scenarios when defining the research question. So different scenarios can, using different scenarios, have an important implication on the results of the study, and then this has to be in line with the research question the decision maker wants to answer. We also, at the end of each subsection, we report a table that has like a summary or a recap of the most important key issues relevant for decision makers, to be sure that they are not overlooked and that they are like highlighted at the end of each subchapter. At the same time, as I said before, also in part A, we have this figure, for example, like an overview of how the collaboration between the commissioner and the practitioner should work and how best collaboration can be guaranteed. These figures have some symbols that representing the practitioner and the commissioner, and figures like this are referred from the text to these figures regularly in the part A to be sure that the relation between these two actors is clear and it's properly done. We also use some decision trees in the text to use some technical concept might be difficult just to explain in a text. So moving to part B of the document, here we present instead an operational tool that is decision trees, key questions to be answered, but also gives prescription to provide a guide on how the practitioner and the commissioner also have to cooperate with each other to design a TA and LCA study. Also how to proceed when evaluating and assessing existing TA and LCA studies. In the first case, we refer to what we'll see later, case A, while once the goal of the commissioner or the decision maker is evaluating, assess existing studies, then we will refer to case B1 and B2. The first tool we propose in part B is what we call the reference tree. The reference tree is our reference page, reference tool that indicates all the different tasks the decision maker might have to fulfill, and also indicate which decision tree they have to rely on to follow and to accomplish their task. I will give you a more detailed example afterwards. So again, the role of a commissioner and practitioner is also in focus in part B. And what is also important here is then we believe that proposing these consecutive steps to follow and also proposing key questions that needs to be answered, we ensure that all the key passages are not overseen, they are sufficiently fulfilled, and also we believe we can help avoiding some malpractices when evaluating studies or when performing new studies. So we'll give you now an example. So first of all, we start from the reference tree. So as you can see, this is the first tool we propose in part B, and this is our reference page where the decision maker has to start its path from, and also to describe its final step. So I will give you an overview of what this means. It can be difficult to read, but I will highlight some parts and explain you what they are about. Further, so here with the start point, what we do here, we suggest how to best describe, or let's say to best frame your research questions. So how to define your goal together with a practitioner. Then we move to the key question: if a new study has to be performed or an existing LCA or TA study already existing in the literature is going to be evaluated. So the first case, when a new study is going to be performed, is called case A, while in the other case, when an existing study will be evaluated, is like explained in details in case B1, in this box highlighted now, or in case B2, in case more existing studies need to be evaluated. This can be the case, for example, when both LCA and TA studies needs to be evaluated for answering your research question as a decision maker. So now, regardless of which one of these cases you will follow, and all these cases are in the next pages, all of these will find the final step in this box at the end of the page that describes all the steps the decision maker should go through before taking his decision. And I will also show you what this box exactly reports. So in the next slide, I give you an example of the case A. So I show you what the case A is about. And I can just remind you that it is when decision maker decide to perform a new TA on the LCA study. So we start from the beginning, where the research question and the goal is defined and communicated from the commissioner to the practitioner. Once this research question is agreed between these two actors, then the practitioner will define the scope. So as you frame the scope, we will go through 5 major elements that we described in this column you see in the lower part of the figure that I will read for you. So the first part is the selection of the subject of analysis. That is the product system. Second part of his work will be selecting the comparison metrics. So with this we mean the functional unit and reference flow. Then there's a third step. It will specify the elements needed and the boundary selection. That is unit processes and system boundaries. to move further to the selection of system for comparison that is represented by benchmarks. And the final step, understanding the maturity of the product system, that is about technology maturity of the CCU that we are evaluating. I give you here now a zoom of here we go, a zoom of one of these boxes. So to show you how we structured it, in the top part, you find the user-friendly title that is better addressing actors that are not from the technical side. Then we provide also the technical title for references. Then we provide also which section the reader can refer to, so to the part A of the document in case he wants to go more into the details. And then we provide a short section that describe what the next step have to be in order to help the decision maker to understand what this step is about. In the next steps, I show you what happens afterwards. So after the scope has been framed by the practitioner, this has to be also agreed by the commissioner of the study. So the commissioner, or the decision maker, if you will, has to also give his opinion about how the scope has been framed, and if he agrees that this is the best way to answer his research question. In case there is no agreement, then we propose a revision stage where the practitioner and the commissioner collaborate together in order to find out how to solve this issue and how to agree on the scope structure. This loop can take a few steps, but at the end, we expect that the decision taken by the practitioner is accepted also by the commissioner, and we can move to the next step. That is when the practitioner is actually performing the study. So after the study is run by the practitioner, the results will be provided to the commissioner, and then we refer, in this case A, to continue to the box, understanding the results and reporting. That was the last step you saw already in the reference tree at the beginning. And now we're also going to show you again in more detail. So this was the final step. And to give you a short overview of what it is about, so here it represents like a checklist where the commissioner can go through again and remind him, reminding him what are the important elements that he has to keep in mind before taking his final decision. This can be related, for example, to the research question again. So asking again if he believes the research question was the right one to answer his original question with the CCU technology, if he sees any major issue now with the goal, if he's aware about how the scope has been structured, and if he had to remind him that he has to consider how the scope also was structured before taking his decision, if everything has been left out and why. We want him to reflect again about the technology maturity of the CCU technologies and to make him aware again about the implication this might have for the results, but also for his decision. We also want to remind him to be very careful about the limitations, but also the uncertainty of the study, to take a sound decision. So that means to ensure that he evaluate also the sensitivity and the uncertainty analysis has been run that's been done by the practitioner. And also, for example, another important point is about the scenarios. So he has to be well aware about the underlying scenarios of the study has been performed in order to understand also the limitation of the decision he will take. So this final step, although represents something that the commissioner already went through with the practitioner before, but we also want to be sure that he considers all of them again before taking his final decision. So now I presented you case A, so commissioning a new TA and LCA study. I will not go through the other two examples that are about evaluating one existing study or evaluating multiple studies, but I hope you will have a look at the document yourself and give us comments on that. So with this, I finished, but before we move to the Q&A section, where my colleagues also will support me in answering the questions or comments you might have, I brought here a couple of questions that might help you to frame your own question that I will read for you. So do you think this report is useful for decision makers, and how it could be improved? The second question is, if you had to apply the notions and steps described in this report, do you find the information provided are sufficient? And if not, what is currently still missing? So I very much enjoyed presenting our last report to you. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to hear from you. So thank you very much.